because I know how zoomed out you must all be. I certainly am. And here's another one when you could be sitting down with your family or watching the television. So thank you very much for this. Now, I only really just started this project at the end of 2019, when I first met Lisa, who was enormously helpful, and a handful of people that I'd started to talk to over in the Newtownards Road. Of course, my timing was perfect, wasn't it? You know, I mean, the next time I tried to get over to Belfast, we were in the COVID lockdown, and so everything came to a juddering halt. So this is very much research in progress, and I'll try and answer the questions, but an awful lot of the answers I still don't really have. Now, this is about quite a big scandal that was uncovered 1953 to 1954. There was a major inquiry, a court inquiry, producing lots of the documents, which is how I'm able to access working people's lives, because normally you don't hear an awful lot about, you know, ordinary people. Now, only one person was found guilty in that inquiry, and that was Annie Copeland from the Upper Newtownards Road. No officials, nobody within Belfast Corporation at all. Even the judge was dissatisfied with this outcome. And I became fascinated by Annie Copeland as a person, but I've yet to reach a conclusion. Was she a victim or a villain? Was she manipulated or manipulative? We'll see what you think at the end of this, and I'd be interested in knowing. The Belfast Blitz of 1941, which largely hit the densely packed working class areas of Belfast, destroyed or severely damaged almost 50% of its housing stock. This added to the reluctance of successive unionist governments to build social housing. They feared that it smacked of socialism, and they certainly were too much in the pockets of private concerns. But together it meant that Belfast, by the early 1950s, was a city of overcrowded slums with rampant tuberculosis, which of course thrives in overcrowding. This project has detailed information about numerous young families forced to live in one room for many years with their parents, and also usually with married siblings in already overcrowded rented accommodation. So normally, as I say, these kind of people would not figure in historical documentation, particularly in their own words, but they do in this investigation, and certainly in the long term, in the full project, I'll be talking an awful lot about a lot of other people involved. So at the heart of the story is 36-year-old Annie Copeland of Upper Newtownards Road. And although she had been working from the age of 15, we know at one stage as a laundress in the city hospital, Children's Hospital, and she said, and other people said, that she also had worked at one stage in City Hall, which would explain her knowledge. But the officials denied that, and I haven't found any corroborating evidence. But although she obviously left school early, she obviously had a good elementary schooling, judging from her high level of literacy in her very extensive correspondence. Nor is she intimidated by authority. When found guilty in 1954, the press depicts her as some kind of Svengali character. She certainly had charisma, and stood out from the thousands of people who haunted City Hall's housing department. So I need to do a lot more research, but at present, while she is definitely guilty, I cannot believe that she could have acted the way she did and had so much knowledge without some line into the City Hall Estates Department, whether through her own connection or somebody else. Her plight seems a sad one. She contracted tuberculosis in her early 20s and is in and out of hospital thereafter. She's single, always referred to by that demeaning word, spinster. In her housing application in 1946, we hear that she's been excluded from the family home, she says, because of her tuberculosis. Her mother says that she was stubborn and selfish, carrying on and coming in late at night. Oh gosh, how many parents have said that about us? Certainly the many scored out addresses in the Estates Department notes on her application form reflects considerable precariousness in her living conditions. Facing eviction from a room in Ballymacarrot, she writes in October 1946 to the Minister of Health, who declares her case a heartrending one in a letter that he himself wrote to the Corporation State Superintendent, Dr. Agnew. She too writes to Agnew that October, I have tried hard to get a room or anything, so long as it took me off the street, she says. It's an awful position to be in, a decent, respectable girl, owing to a serious illness. I'm sleeping one night here and one night there. Agnew does interview her at City Hall and responds to the minister, and I quote, naturally, I feel very sympathetic towards her and I'm anxious to assist in every way possible. The difficulty, of course, is that she is competing with families and consequently the points, the so-called point system, to her credit, are not as high as those of other applicants. Nevertheless, I shall endeavour to find accommodation for her in a hut. These were Nissen huts, but it is unlikely that converted huts will be available in any great numbers for some considerable time to come. Her aunt hopes that she might get one of the new prefabricated bungalows, but these were several steps up the housing chain, unavailable even to large families in the dire post-war housing situation. In January 1947, she eventually did find accommodation at 146 Upper Newtownards Road on the top floor in a house along with 7 other families who soon started complaining about her tuberculosis. She received several notices to quit, but she seems also to have helped at least one with advice in a housing application. So throughout, she does show that she's very well informed of the ins and outs of Belfast Corporation housing allocations policies, even to the extent of knowing quite a lot of detail of plans for new houses being built, to the practical delays, etc., etc. In another life, I felt that she would have been a successful lobbyist. Over the next 3 years, she lobbies councillors, MPs, and others in influential positions who did forward her letters to the Corporation Estates Department, as well as regularly going there themselves to argue her case. Future Unionist MP and Minister of Education, Harry Midgley, recalled her coming on crutches to his Willowfield Advice Centre in September 1948, and then unfolding, and I quote, a long story of human misery, such as I had seldom listened to. She offered him 10 to 20 pounds key money to get a house. So in other words, a bribe. And it seems that that practice was quite widespread. Of course, he later denounced it at the 1953 inquiry. Naturally, because of her health, she encountered many medical practitioners, particularly the kindly Dr. John Gillespie, who'd been chief TB medical officer for County Down, and he would continue to help her financially and otherwise until his death aged 88 in 1960. At her request, he personally went to City Hall and spoke with the man then in charge of housing allocations, Robert Young. Young, also living in East Belfast, but in rather leafier part near Cypress Avenue, he's going to play a key role in this story. He'd entered the service of the corporation as a clerical assistant in 1936, aged 23, then became a rent collector, and in September 1948 he was made supervisor inspector in succession to John Lazenbat, who himself had succeeded Agnew as estate superintendent. So it was Young that was in charge of all housing allocations when Dr. Gillespie called on him. Young did go out to number 146 to see Annie Copeland and find her in one room, having overstayed her notice, all the other tenants having been evicted and workmen and decorators already in renovating the property. He did rehouse her, but to a requisitioned old cottage, which certainly would have been demolished in due course. She moved into this number 233 Upper Newtownards Road in December 1950. The accommodation was not ideal, but it was considerably better than the cases we were to hear about in the corruption inquiry. The first fully documented case we have, sorry till I get some water. The first fully documented case of Annie taking money is in early 1952, though it seems she already had a reputation for helping with housing applications. A woman who knew her had noticed an ad in the Belfast Telegraph offering £50 rent in advance for any kind of accommodation. It had been placed by 24-year-old Edna Brown, the wife of two married brothers, their wives and three children, who'd been living in the 3-bedroomed home of their parents in West Belfast since 1948. Annie Copeland was able to help them through the various hoops to increase their points, and they did get houses in Bloomfield and Tocknamona, two of the better new corporation estates. Then something of a female bush telegraph develops via extended families visiting. There's lots and lots of visiting going on then. It's amazing. I'm going to do some kind of network analysis on it. Annie Copeland then was taking between 30 and 36 pounds in each case, when the average Belfast wage for a working man was 5 to 7 pounds per week. She had something of a deputy and 45-year-old single Sarah Madden of Apsley Street, lying between the Ormeau and Dublin roads near the city centre. And she was then working as a machinist in the match factory on the Donegal Road. She was to go on to introduce 15 families to Annie Copeland and collected the money from them, handing over £512 to her, but only being given back just below £15 in total, not even enough to cover her bus fares. Sarah Madden's behaviour in the witness box at in court presented a very sad picture of someone, perhaps lonely, being given a new status by her activities. The judge describes her as a very foolish and unhappy woman, and as far as I know, no action was taken against her. Annie Copeland in all of this comes over as a very strong-minded woman who could and did exert influence over weaker ones. Within months then, the Bush Telegraph had become so live that people were hearing about it at their workplaces and in the bus depots. Why Annie Copeland doesn't act more cautiously when all these people were calling on her rather baffles me. And it was when a childless couple succeeded in leaping over the 23,000 people who'd applied for corporation houses in the 16 months to May 1953. It was when this happened that Irish Labour Party councillor for Smithfield, Tim O'Sullivan, picks up on it. Because two families, he was trying to help two families living in quite appalling conditions in the centre of the city, had asked them for help and they couldn't even get on the waiting list. O'Sullivan starts spying on Annie's house and noting lots of people going in and out. And he embarks on a bit of a pantomime in which his electoral agent, Leo Presley, with O'Sullivan's own wife posing as Mrs. Presley, would pretend to be housing applicants seeking Annie Copeland's assistance. Presley's gusto for the task, also involving rather crude phone tapping and recording of his telephone conversations with her, then adds another layer of melodrama and rather devalues their evidence in court in the eyes of the judge, Judge Bradley McCall. Even so, by May 1953, O'Sullivan had enough evidence to drop his bombshell accusation of corporation corruption at the 1st of May council meeting. Thus started the formal investigation leading to the court case that November. It sat for 27 days in Crumlin Road Courthouse, longer than that for the Princess Victoria disaster 18 months earlier. The Princess Victoria disaster, when all but 44 of the 177 crew and passengers of the Lawrence Stranraer ferry had sunk just off the coast, the Northern Ireland coast. Given how widespread the housing crisis was, it attracted huge public interest, crowds inside and outside the court, sometimes reacting to witnesses who would arrive dressed in their Sunday best to give evidence. But what of Annie Copeland? How was she greeted? Well, she never appeared because successive doctors proclaimed her unfit to take the witness box. But all 21 of those who had dealt with her did, encouraged to do so by assurances from the Attorney General that they would not be prosecuted. Young was to be in the witness box for 6 entire days. And after lengthy grilling, no charge was upheld against any member of corporation staff. The judge felt that despite their actions, those who were certainly about to lose their houses should be allowed to reapply. He said the magnitude of the housing problem in Belfast was widely recognised. And here he detailed the climate that would drive, and I quote, many otherwise honourable and respectable people to lie, to bribe, and to cheat their way into a corporation house, unquote. While deploring and condemning their conduct, he did, however, applaud them for confessing to their wrongdoing, even though in doing so they risked losing their homes. He was shocked at hearing about the conditions in which many of them had been living. They seemed genuinely ignorant of the housing allocation system. Had they known, he thought, they might quite properly have secured houses by their own efforts. Corporation councillors, however, paid no heed to the judge's plea for understanding And at its 16th of June meeting, the estate subcommittee recommended the eviction of all of those involved and debarred them from ever applying for a corporation house again. A full meeting of the Estates Committee endorsed that decision. Councillor O'Sullivan walked out in protest. He told the Belfast Telegraph that he was protesting at what he called this cover-up. He'd moved an amendment to defer action until the Attorney General's intentions were known, but could find no seconder. It was unfair, he told the reporter, to victimise these people who had come forward and told the truth. Those about to be evicted wrote to the Lord Mayor and aldermen on the 16th of July, explaining the very difficult situation in which they now found themselves. It's an eloquent appeal, I quote, "We appreciate the fact that we have wronged greatly by the manner in which we obtained our houses, but all of us were in genuine distress and were ignorant of the point system. They accept that the ejection decision was just, quote, but surely, in view of the fact that we have been of service to the corporation in bringing these wrongful practices to light, it would be more just to be merciful. Our children are blameless, yet they will suffer most, and they throw themselves on the mercy of Belfast. To err is human, to forgive is divine," which is a quote from Alexander Pope's essay on criticism. It's actually quite a moving letter. But their appeal was unsuccessful. They were, however, allowed to re-register after 2 years, the appeal court overturning the councillor's peevish decision. But Annie Copeland was to be evicted, the decision taken by the estate subcommittee on the 25th of August. She would claim in a series of letters to people in City Hall, and undoubtedly to others, that she had been a scapegoat. And I quote, "The victim of a frame-up, my good name trailed through the mud. There are understandable worries about losing her home, and she had also been lost national assistance. But these are swamped by threats, and this is the nature of Annie's letters. You're never quite sure what to believe because she is very threatening and at times a bit delusional. She says in one of her letters that she's going to take Mr. T. O'Sullivan and his 21 bribed witness into the High Court and prove that it was all a Fenian concoction," unquote. No, sorry, I continue. "So take warning how you use my name," she tells Young in her letter, "as the next letter you shall receive will be from my barrister." She also wrote to Lazenbat on the 27th of November. She's quite incensed. "I kept my part of the bargain," she says, "but you definitely did not keep yours." She talks about everything he promised if she took the rap and was the scapegoat for you. She claims he assured her she would not go to jail because of the state of her health and she would never lose her house. Now, all these letters were sent both by Lazenbat and to Young, to the Attorney General. So they're not really trying to cover anything up. Now, Annie then was to vacate her house by the 8th of November. She appealed the notice but lost, her legal representative arguing her case in the Belfast Summons Court, contending that she was being punished for her part in the recent housing inquiry. The corporation, he said, are treating the findings of that inquiry as a sort of final judgment. And indeed, for the rest of her life, Annie Copeland believed that she continued to be punished for its findings. The eviction finally took place on Monday, the 20th of June, 1955. and the press were there to report it in front page detail. Bailiffs arrived from the under sheriff's office at 10 a.m, but found the windows barred and the doors bolted from inside. So they climbed over the wall and entered by the back door. They found her in bed, but she was finally assisted out of the house at 12 noon. The press reported that she sat crying into a large white handkerchief in the entry, where her furniture was being piled by two labourers brought in by the bailiffs. About 100 people, mostly women, had gathered outside her house. Throughout the eviction, an ambulance was waiting to take her to hospital, but she refused. A furniture van came that afternoon to take her furniture to the city hospital welfare hostel, and she said she would go later. But the newsletter reported the following day she'd turned down a place and was being accommodated by friends. We next encounter Annie Copeland in proceedings of the Belfast Recorder's Court on the 6th of January 1959. She was claiming damages from shipyard plater William Boyd, from whom she had rented 2 rooms at 42 Templemore Avenue in December 1955 for £1 a week. She'd been hospitalised on the 21st of December 1957, and clearly rent was not being paid because it was on that basis that Boyd issued his notice. When she returned from hospital after 5 weeks, she found the locks changed. In the case she took against him, it was for breach of tenancy. She claims that during the time she couldn't get back in, that she slept in the extern department of the Royal Victoria Hospital, other nights in people's houses, and even had walked the streets. She got back into the house when she paid her arrears, but was hospitalised again in September 1958, and on return found the front door lock had been changed. She went to the local police station and returned with a policewoman to collect clothing, and she found her bedroom had been broken into. Since then, she claims, I have slept in the backs of taxis and cars. I have gone to house agents in the pretense of buying a house, and I've kept the keys for 2 or 3 days to keep me off the streets. She'd been discharged from White Abbey Sanatorium as incurable, and the welfare authorities couldn't get her accommodation because of tuberculosis. Boyd said that he'd given her accommodation on a friend's recommendation, but when he found out that his tenancy agreement forbade subletting, he gave her notice 3 times but couldn't get her out. Judge Fox, who presided over the hearing, and he must have been used to these kind of squabbles, adjourned proceedings and advised the 2 of them to reach a compromise. Thereafter, Annie finds accommodation at 58 Vicarage Street, again, just off Upper Newtownards Road. It was to hear that 2 local women, Mrs. C and Mrs. W, I'll call them, came in January 1960 to ask for her help in getting a corporation house. And again, Annie Copeland charges £30 for what was actually, by all accounts, pretty good advice. And she, I don't know yet, but she may actually have been doing this up till then. Again, she claims that the money was going to Robert Young in the Corporation Estates Department. And to prove it, she brings the 2 women to Templemore Avenue and a remarkable charade ensues. At around 7 p.m. on Tuesday, the 8th of March, the two women and Annie Copeland left Vicarage Street by the back door. Annie Copeland carrying a shopping bag containing a bundle of their money and two other bundles that she produced to show them. And they walked along the Albert Bridge Road to Templemore Avenue. There, the two women said they stood at the corner at Norbury's, which I assume was a shop back then. And she told them to watch out for a small black car. She then went a bit further and stood outside the telephone kiosk. And after 5 to 10 minutes, Mrs. C said, a black Morris Minor came along the Albert Bridge Road from the direction of the rope works, turning into Templemore Avenue, going slowly past them and stopping at the curb beside Annie Copeland. Mrs. C said she recognised Robert Young of the Estates Department, and Annie Copeland got into the front beside him. She also wrote the registration number on a scrap of paper and later gave it in as evidence. At the end of June, Mrs. C was allocated a prefab bungalow. Annie Copeland told her not to accept it as she would probably get a proper house. So they did that, they turned it down, but they didn't get the house and then demanded their money back. Another woman, Mrs. G, paid Annie Copeland money to help get her daughter a house. Her daughter got a house in Frome Street, lower Newtownards Road, without Annie Copeland's help, and then likewise demanded her money back. She said Annie Copeland got very angry, said she'd have to see Young for the money, but no money materialised when Mrs. G returned. And when she threatens to go to Young herself, Annie Copeland retorts, yes, you just go ahead, and when you're there, just call round to Waring Street Police Barracks while you're at it, unquote. She does call in at the barracks, and in November 1960, Annie was tried at Belfast Petty Sessions on the charge of attempting to defraud and claiming falsely that she would pay an official in the Estates Department. Young and Lazenbat are summoned again to court to explain themselves. Young, though confirming that that actually was the registration number of his car, claimed it had been in his locked garage all night and that he himself was at home doing some decorating. Annie Copeland does appear in court this time, but briefly and in dramatic circumstances. She collapses in the witness box. The court's adjourned for an hour. She's examined by a doctor who proclaimed her unfit to stand trial, but she wanted to go on. So a mattress and pillows are brought into the court for her. But after a few minutes, it didn't seem to work. She's helped off the mattress and out of court, and she's bound over on bail to appear at the City Commission on the 1st of December. Then the presiding judge was Judge McVeigh, who had actually been the corporation's counsel at the 1953 inquiry. So he's been there before and is a bit more impatient than the other judges. He wants her independently medically examined and is annoyed when she won't give an answer as to whether this is possible. In impatience, he writes, the only way to make her confirm is to withdraw her bail, have her arrested and examined in prison. She might be unfit to stand trial, he argues, but he needed to know the truth. In the end, she is convicted and given a suspended sentence of 9 months. She's back in court on the 30th of May, 1961, having taken action against a local man for assaulting her on the night of the 23rd of December, 1960. Her story was that she was waiting outside a telephone kiosk when they got into conversation. She told him she was anxious to fill in an appeal form. He said he knew how to do it, and they went back to her house for him to fill in the form. There, she claimed he assaulted her. She tried to run out of the house and he struggled with her, catching her by the throat. He claimed that having asked if she was the person involved in the housing scandal, said he wanted nothing more to do with her and simply went away. She then informed the police, who came immediately. A medical examination confirmed that she had bruises to her throat and shoulders and was in a state of shock. He did admit meeting her, even to helping her with the form, but it was all done outside. And although he was given an absolute discharge, the magistrate stated that he believed the man had indeed gone to her house and committed the offence, but she was the author of her own misfortune. Well, make of that as you will. Doesn't sound too good to me. Even so, Annie was pretty litigious, and by this stage she's losing supporters. Her application for leave to appeal against the 1960 verdict was heard in Belfast Court of Appeal in June 1961 before Lord Chief Justices McDermott and Black. She represents herself. In the press report, she limps up to the judges and hands them a bundle of papers, but seems more concerned to complain about the press taking pictures of her coming out of court. She'd phoned the newspaper to complain. I mean, Annie had never behaved like a wilting buttercup, and as she grows older and increasingly in the public eye, this does not attract sympathy. It was certainly no joke being a single middle-aged woman in Belfast 60 years ago, or indeed anywhere. Echoes of Brian Moore's Judith Hearn here. The document she was asking the judges to read seemed to have been insulting letters from a lot of people, including her own mother. She offers to show more, but the judge declines as they were irrelevant to her appeal. You really need to show us how the verdict was wrong, he tells her. She then does make the valid argument that Judge McVeigh had been QC in the housing corruption case and should not have heard the recent one. The judge answers her, but you could have been sent to jail, and maybe he was dealing with you not harshly, and her appeal was refused. Again, his reasons seem rather odd to me. I lose sight of Annie Copeland in 1966, when again she's back in court, taking action against her loss of national assistance. But the project is obviously ongoing, and I have a lot more work to do on it. When I can get back to Belfast and when everywhere opens up again, and like all of you, it can't come soon enough. So let me just conclude. Her illness was genuine enough, but does she use it excessively to curry sympathy, and is she manipulative? Well, yes to both questions, but they were common aspects of human behavior, I suppose. Secondly, is she guilty? Yes, and we should not lose sight of the fact that a lot of relatively poor people suffered as a result. But they'd come to her, and the practice is rife, as are accusations of corruption in the council. Where does the money go? How does she pay all the legal fees in her many court cases? I've yet to answer those questions. She certainly is very litigious and very often in court. And she also is at times delusional, as her letters show. Yet I don't get a sense of her being rejected either by the local community, and she appears, or by friends of whom she appears to have many. And you do have to admire her feistiness, her unwillingness to accept the pettiness and clear misogyny of officialdom. The unforgettable Miss Copeland was the Daily Mirror's headline on the 10th of March, 1954, taking its details from Judge Bradley McCall's report, and I quote from him: "I have no doubt that she is the victim of chronic ill health and that her circumstances generally are pitiable, but she is by no means friendless. She possesses and exercises a remarkable talent for attracting and retaining the sympathy of those persons who come in contact with her. Persons who have met her do not readily forget her." So there is another side to this story, and I hope I'll come back to you someday with episode 2. So there we go. See what you make of it. Thanks, everybody. And
thank you. I am very much looking forward to part 2, Marianne. It's brilliant. I am going to stop recording now, if that makes people feel more comfortable, if they want to ask any questions, things like that. So,
did you want to show some of the slides, or do you not want to bother? Or are we not bother?
Oh yeah, I can show some of the slides. I think it helps to put a name, a face to the name. Okay.
And I'll be able to talk over them, won't I? So you've already shown slide 1.